your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide half a world away.
Prices are rising in the U.S. at their fastest pace in over 40 years. And U.S. President Joe Biden blames, as you heard there, Russia's Vladimir Putin for it. The latest U.S. inflation rate just out today is 8.5%, the biggest annual jump since 1981. That means consumer prices south of the border in March were 8.5% higher than the year before. Inflation in Canada is also climbing. Right now it sits at 5.7%. The new updated number comes out next Wednesday. And tomorrow, the Bank of Canada is expected to raise interest rates for a second time in a row. That will make borrowing money more expensive for Canadians, but it should also eventually work to curb inflation somewhat. Randy Boissonnault is the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance. He's with us tonight from Edmonton. Minister, great to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be here, Vashi.
I have some questions for you, and I know your primary reason for being here, small business tax changes. But as the Associate Minister of Finance, I do want to start off with the big economic news of the day, and in particular around the cost of living for Canadians, something Canadians are really struggling with at this moment. What specifically does your budget do to address those rising costs? Think food, think gas, the price of gas, to address those rising costs in the immediacy of right now.
Thanks, Vashi. I appreciate the opportunity, and the clip from President Biden shows that inflation is not a made in Canada thing. The war in Ukraine is jacking up energy prices. We see it at the pumps. The China's zero COVID policy is also making sure that the supply chains stay snarled, and the amount of goods that we've all purchased during the pandemic has also slowed up supply chain. So what are we doing? The budget really focuses on affordability by growing the economy, putting more money in the pockets of Canadians. And so right away, if you take a look at the childcare deal that we concluded over the last year with all provinces and territories, lastly with Ontario, in my own province of Alberta, that puts about $5,600 a year in the pockets of families for seniors, for people who get the Canada Child Benefit, and for Canada Workers Benefit. Those core benefits are already indexed to inflation, so that helps. We've got the dental care program, which we hope to see rolling out across the country. That will also help Canadians that are making less than $90,000 as a family. There's also a first-time homebuyers tax. It's going to be doubled, and $500 is going to go to Canadians that are struggling with housing. And then there's also a multi-generational house tax credit, so that you can, change your housing accommodation to have multi-generations. Now, that's not going to affect the price at the pumps, Vashi. It's not going to reduce the price of bread or meat at the grocery till, but it is going to put more money in people's pockets, and it's going to make the bottom line better for families.
And I certainly take your point, Minister, that this isn't entirely made in Canada, that there are supply pressures well outside of the federal government's control, well outside of Canadians' control. At the same time, I spoke to a number of economists last year who did not completely absolve the government of its role in pushing, increasing pressure on inflation thanks to the amount of spending in the budget. I'm not, trying to paint a picture that the spending in the budget is solely what's driving it, but it is part of it. Is that irresponsible on your government's part?
I think if you take a look at statements from people like Stephen Poloz and others who've said that the investments that our government made in Canadians during the pandemic have not been underpinning the rise in inflation. That's an important counterpoint to those other arguments. I will say in this budget, 60% of the measures, and a lot of those measures are focused, as you know, Vashi, on housing. A lot of the measures are focused on economic growth. And in my own province of Alberta, we've got 3,000 tech firms here. And as the Prime Minister mentioned today, we're going to make sure that the small business tax rate actually stays in place between $15 million in capital all the way to 50. That's going to put a lot of money back in the pockets of small business entrepreneurs and leave them to make sure that they're able to make sure that their employees also have higher wages.
And I promise you I have questions about that in just a moment.
Sure.
But when I ask you if the spending is irresponsible, I'm not referring to the pandemic spending. I'm referring to the spending particularly in this budget, which, yes, is much less than what was spent during the pandemic. But I looked at, for example, the 2017 budget, and I was looking through all the various projections there when it came to program expenses. They were in and around 6% of GDP. Now all the projections are between 19 and 15%. So like a doubling of, as a portion of GDP, how much this government is spending. Once again, given inflation at this moment, is that the responsible thing to do in this budget?
So I think if we take a look, and I love that you looked at the numbers in the 2017 budget, Vashi, because if we take a look at what the new spending is in the 2022 budget, it's $7 billion, which is about 0.3% of GDP. So when you add that to the fact that you've seen us cut down from 2020 to 21 to 22, and then you look at the downward fiscal track getting us to about $8 billion in 26, 27, and making sure that the debt to GDP ratio keeps coming down, that fiscal guardrail, that downward fiscal track is the commitment we're making to Canadians. And it's almost like a back to basics approach where we're going to do new things, but we're only going to do them based on economic growth. And you know, because you've seen the numbers, that our Q4 growth rate was like 6.7%, even in January.
It's good
4%.
now, but there's a lot of. Do you? Yeah, for sure, there is a lot of economic growth right now. But is your government perhaps overestimating that growth in the future? There's a lot of uncertainty, even according recently to the OECD, right?
I think we need to look into the middle and long term, which is why the investments that we're making in this budget in terms of housing, in terms of economic development, the Canada Innovation Agency, the Canada Growth Fund, the billions of dollars we're spending on the green transition. I spent yesterday with people from the pathways and other industries talking about carbon capture, use and storage, and how pleased they are to see that in the budget, because they know that we need to get to net zero. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs and the ability for us to meet our green targets. And when you add to that hydrogen, you add to that the number of jobs we're seeing that we need to put into the market, because we've seen our employment rate at 5.3%. That's the lowest it's been since I was 6 years old, Vashi. 1976 is the last time we had unemployment that was that low. So there's a good news economic story, and we need to prepare for the mid and long term. And I do believe that's what this budget does.
I just really want to point out, even with something like, for example, carbon capture, having worked in Alberta, I saw the number of projects that were going to go ahead and didn't end up. So a lot of what you're proposing, it will kind of be like, the devil will be in the details. We'll see how it materializes in order to actually do what your government says it's going to do. But I do want to get to those small business tax changes. I just want to explain them for our audience. Small businesses are taxed at, and correct me if I'm wrong here, 9% compared to the federal corporate rate of 15%. To access the rate, it's proportionally reduced when a business has taxable income between $10 and $15 million, and then it's totally capped at $15 million. What your government in this budget did was make that phase out more gradual and then extend the cap to $50 million. First part of the question, who does that help? Second part of the question, why not do what I've heard a lot of small business owners say around credit card fees? They've been asking for it. You've been promising for it, I think, since 2019 and then in the last budget, and you haven't done anything on that.
So we have been working with the credit card companies on reducing credit card fees. It's a voluntary system now. So I hear small business. It came up again during the pre-budget consultations that I helped Minister Freeland lead across the country. And when it comes to why are we doing this and who's it going to help, it's going to help businesses right on 104th Street, right in the downtown heart of my riding, all across Alberta, all across the country. And the reason we did is because we want these businesses to not feel that there's this sort of artificial threshold at 15 million where they should, pause because there's going to be a big tax hit that they're going to face. We want them to scale to 50 million. And with the other things we put in the budget, once they get to that 50 million range, with speeding up intellectual property, making sure they're able to capture more intellectual property, connecting them to more capital sources, making sure that for the green tech companies, the Canada Growth Fund is there to help attract foreign and domestic capital to their businesses. This is a good news story because we want small and medium-sized businesses in this country to grow, to stay here, to scale, and to really create more jobs and really lean into helping us grow the economy for the long term. And that's also really good for productivity when you add one of our other funds, Vashi, which is the Canadian Digital Adoption Program, which is $4 billion to help companies to get digital ready, to make sure their products are available digitally, but based on what we're seeing in the security environment internationally, also to be cyber protected, which is really important from a critical business operations standpoint.
Okay, unfortunately, I have lots of questions about the effectiveness or potential effectiveness of that program too, but unfortunately, I'm out of time. I do appreciate your time, Minister. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Vashi. All the best.
You too. Randy Boissonnault is the Minister of Tourism. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.